My castaway this week is a priest. His father was a schoolmaster, his mother a domestic servant. He wanted to be a doctor, but his parents couldn't afford the fees, so he trained as a teacher and then transferred to the priesthood in his mid-20s. In itself, it's not a particularly unusual story, except that this priest was a black South African, brought up in the system of apartheid. For the past 30 years, he's used his position in the Anglican Church to speak out against the injustices which oppressed his people. Awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1984, he's today recognised as one of the principal architects of South Africa's multiracial future. He is the Anglican Archbishop of Cape Town, the Most Reverend Desmond Tutu. You've spent a lifetime fighting the evil of apartheid, and this year in April, as we all know, black South Africans queued up to vote in their country's first democratic elections. Was that day a miracle for you, or was it something you had always known would happen?
No words anywhere in the world would ever be able to describe adequately how we all felt on that day. And of course, we recognize now, it was a miracle.
But it has to be said, in I think it was 1979, you predicted that Nelson Mandela would lead South Africa. You were 5 years out,
yeah.
But that's what you said. So
yes.
Were you always so convinced that the unbelievable would happen, or were you just understandably being encouraging?
Most of the time, one had this as an article of faith. The issue is not in doubt. If God be for us, who can be against us? But there were times when you had to hold on to that belief by the very skin of your teeth. And sometimes you repeated things like, we are going to be free. Very much like whistling in the dark to keep your courage up.
But what are today on the streets of South Africa, the physical manifestations? What do you see around you that, again, you might never have witnessed?
In some ways, it's the same things that were there. Before April the 27th, the white people owned 87% of the land. After April the 27th, they still owned 87% of the land. But you are looking at some of these realities with different eyes. It's like when you are in love. Suddenly, this flower, which was beautiful before, is exquisite now. There is a texture in the atmosphere. You can even smell. It is different to be free. Not to have to pat your pocket when you see a police officer and wonder whether he's not going to ask you, have you got your pass on you? It's, hey, I'm a human being, and this has been recognized. I have a dignity. It's just fantastic.
Well, as you know, what we do on this programme is cast you away from it all on a desert island. Tell me about your music. What's the first record you play when you get there?
Unforgettable. Nat King Cole. They said he had a voice like a cat walking on velvet, sort of smoky.
Unforgettable, that's what you are. Unforgettable, though near or far.
Nat King Cole and Natalie Cole, his daughter, singing Unforgettable. Having threatened you, Archbishop Tutu, with this desert island, I know that you spend a lot of time alone anyway, don't you? You get up before dawn and spend hours without speaking, which must be very difficult.
I was very fortunate in that I was trained for the priesthood by the Community of the Resurrection. And for the community, silence has always been a very important part of that life. I talk a lot. My young daughter, when she was 3, she'd been annoying me because she was chattering away. And I said to her, "Oh, Mpho, you talk too much. Shut up." She says, "Daddy, you talk too much too. You talk all alone in church." But I think it's an important thing for me that I try and get up fairly early, maybe 4 o'clock, and just try to be quiet in the presence of God.
You're also an exerciser, aren't you? You're a jogger. I mean, is it easy for an archbishop to jog around Cape Town?
I've stopped jogging. Partly, I suppose, it is decrepitude. I've got a treadmill now.
But you don't attempt to pray on the treadmill?
I do.
Do.
Yes, I mean, that is when I usually am doing my intercessions. I have in my mind the globe, and I'm looking at the United States and Canada and pray for the people there that I probably know, and then move British Isles, Scandinavia, Europe, Asia, Africa, South America.
But how much has life changed for you now that the battle, the major part of the battle, is won? I mean, this spring, on May the 9th, you stood on the balcony of the City Hall in Cape Town, and to tumultuous applause, you introduced President Mandela. Were you not in that moment, as it were, handing over the mantle of preeminence?
I was hoping, hey, now take over, man, and let's be able to do most of the kind of things that one should be doing. But we've got to be very careful that we don't give the people the impression that the things we were doing were not part of what it means to be a Christian. It's in fact a question of balance. But we still find people calling on us, certainly in other parts of Africa, in other parts of the world. Especially, I suppose, because of what has happened in South Africa. People think that South Africans now have a formula. Come to Liberia.
They think you can perform the miracle.
Yes, come to Liberia, come to Rwanda. For the sake of the world, I want to be able to say to Bosnia, you are going through a nightmare. South Africa had a nightmare, the nightmare of apartheid. It ended. Your nightmare will end.
Let's have some more music. What's your second record?
We Are the World. That was incredible because listening to all those children singing made you say it's beautiful to be human. This compassion, this remembering that despite all the differences, we are one.
There comes a time when we heed a certain call, when the world must come together as one. There are people dying. Oh, when it's time to lend a hand to life, the greatest gift of all.
USA for Africa and We Are the World, conducted and produced by Quincy Jones. Let's go back to your beginnings in the Transvaal 63 years ago. Apparently you were a very sickly baby and they thought you wouldn't live.
Yes. The end result is that now I have a half paralyzed right hand. People don't usually notice this, but if you looked carefully, you'd see that my right hand is a great deal smaller than my left hand, and now I am left-handed, but not maybe naturally so. And maybe as I was delicate, my grandmother gave me a name, Mpilo, which means life. We want this child to pulsate with life. He is sickly, almost moribund, and it looked like it had not succeeded because much later I contracted TB. That's when I was so impressed by the caring of Trevor Huddleston. But the doctor told him on one of the visits that I was going to die. I wasn't going to pull through.
You were in your teens by then, weren't you?
Yes.
Trevor Huddleston was a parish priest then, wasn't he?
In Sophiatown, yes.
It was a Johannesburg slum.
Yes.
And obviously he went on to become the leading anti-apartheid voice in Britain.
Yes.
When had you first met him? Can you remember that moment?
I didn't know the first time that it was he. My mother, who was not very well educated, I mean, she didn't do more than a few years in primary school, was a cook for blind black women. And she and I were standing on the veranda, the stoop of the hostel which housed these black women. I was about maybe 9 or so when this tall priest with a flowing cassock swept past, and he was wearing a big black hat. He doffed his hat to my mother. Now, that was sort of mind-blowing for me, because a white man greeting my mother with such courtesy, this can't be true. I discovered subsequently that this was Trevor Harrison. I got to know him a great deal better when I then went to high school and then lived in a hostel that the CR Fathers had started up in Sophiatown.
How aware were you as a small boy and then as a teenager that you weren't regarded as equal by the whites? I mean, what were, again, your first impressions of that?
We were living in a town called Klerksdorp, and I was probably the only black kid who had a bicycle, and my father sent me to town often to buy him the newspapers and things. And I recall on one occasion going past a school for white children, a primary school, and saw black children scavenging in the waste bins of the school, and they were picking perfectly clean sandwiches and fruit which the white kids had thrown away because they were being given free school feeding, which they didn't want. They wanted to eat what their mothers had prepared for them. And here were most of the black kids whose parents couldn't afford, who didn't have free school feeding provided by the government. And maybe you didn't know then, of course, that this thing was etching itself on your consciousness. Well, there it was. Yet one other thing you would remember in later years.
Let's have your next record, number 3.
In the Mood. Now you can see my vintage. Because this was a great favorite just after the war, I mean, the Second World War, and we used to jive, and this is tremendous.
Glenn Miller and In the Mood.
Well, you know, I can just still picture in my mind's eye the jukeboxes that we had in a number of the stores in our townships. And I can just see all these young people, and I was amongst them, jiving away like crazy.
Out of the front of the
on the stoop of the veranda of the store.
Of course, it was about that time, just after the war, when you were training as a teacher, that the hardline government adopted apartness, as its official policy. Did you feel, I wonder then, any stirrings of the political activist in you, you know, the determination to challenge it?
1948. No, there was just a deep sadness when General Smuts was defeated, because we thought, yes, things were bad, but I mean, this man was maybe a little liberal. All these connections that he had with Great Britain meant that he wouldn't be nasty to us. And here were these people who were coming to power who were blatantly racist. They were saying, when you put the black person in his place, and they meant it.
And indeed, in the end, it was because of the apartheid policy that you gave up being a teacher. You resigned in protest, didn't you?
I was very fond of teaching. I enjoyed seeing children opening up and blossoming. And then when Dr. Verwoerd introduced Bantu education, which was an education decidedly inferior, they made no bones about it. They were quite clear. They were going to teach black children just enough English and Afrikaans, the languages of the white people, for them to understand instructions that they were going to be given by their employers, white employers. They were being prepared for servanthood, perpetual servanthood. And I said, sorry, I don't think I could possibly collaborate with this kind of gruel that was being fed to our children.
So you turned to the priesthood at that point. You would have been about 25. Yes. You've described it since as like being grabbed, and I quote, being grabbed by the scruff of the neck to spread the word, whether it was convenient or not. I take from that it wasn't just a vocation to serve God, but also to take on the system. I mean, was that the turning point?
I have to be quite honest that when I abandoned teaching, I didn't go into the priesthood because I had a high sense that God was calling me. It is only much later that you realized, that there were some things that, although, yes, we all have the freedom to choose, there are times when, yes, it is almost like God grabbing you by the scruff of the neck and saying, that is what you are going to do, whether you like it or not.
Next piece of music.
Beethoven. When I listen to this, two things. How is it possible that such incredible beauty could come from one man? You listen to all the pieces of music he's done. The other is he was deaf. And because I'm disabled to some extent too, it's such a great inspiration. And the piano concerto, I love playing Beethoven real loud.
Part of Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 1, played by Alicia de la Rocha, with the London Symphony Orchestra conducted by Michael Tilson Thomas. You came to England, Archbishop Tutu, in the 60s, and you studied and worked here in London and in Surrey. The contrast between life as a second-class citizen, third-class, fourth-class in South Africa, and swinging London in the 60s must have been colossal.
Unbelievable. Mind-blowing. To walk the streets of London, and we did that with Leah, just to savor this thing of being free, and it would be we who would cross the street to accost a police officer, and in the early days we would walk even very, very late, which would have been curfew time in South Africa, and ask for directions. I always told people we would ask for directions even when we knew where we were going, just for the incredible fun of having a police officer, and a white police officer at that, speaking to you courteously, sir, madam, and that he was not going to ask, Why are you here? Where is your pass that gives you permission to be here at this time? Incredible. I mean, again, how do you describe it to someone who's never had the experience, the other experience?
But you had to go back to South Africa, obviously,
Yeah.
eventually, and you lectured, and then you travelled again very widely in Asia and Africa. But in 1975, when you were 44, you became the Anglican Dean of Johannesburg, and within a year, you wrote that letter to the Prime Minister, B.J. Forster, an open letter, and its message was pretty straightforward, wasn't it?
Yes. I just felt an incredible foreboding that things were going to explode unless the government did something pretty quickly, pretty dramatic. It happened that I was in a retreat, and it seemed like God was saying, maybe if you write this letter, this man may respond, and this catastrophe may just be averted.
But he didn't.
He treated it with contempt and in fact said that I couldn't have thought this up myself. I had been put up to it by the white opposition party.
But the following month, of course, your prediction came horribly true.
Yeah. These children who revolted, they showed us up, we the adults, because we had opposed apartheid, but we had not been ready like they seemed to be ready even to die.
But they were the children of Soweto, and indeed 600 of them died, didn't they?
The children died. But I mean, you think now of what our Lord said about the grain, which if it does not fall to the ground and die, remains alone. But when it does fall to the ground and die, it germinates and blossoms. And it is in part because those children and others did what they did, that now the desert that was South Africa is blossoming.
More music.
Jesu, joy of man's desiring. I've always just loved this. It was played sung when I was made bishop in 1976. Ever since, I mean, whenever there's been an important occasion in my life, I've wanted it played. Tabernacle Choir singing Jesu, joy of man's desiring. From then on, of course, as everyone knows, you became an extremely effective thorn in the side of the white South African government, openly criticising it, calling for sanctions against the country. How much did you therefore fear for your own life and those of your family? I don't think you spend a great deal of time being overwrought, as it were. You are aware that you're in a struggle and there are going to be casualties. But there were death threats, weren't there? Yes, and you get scared, yeah, but you have to say, well, if I am going to be killed, hey, God, I'm doing your work and you jolly well are going to have to look after me. If you don't, tough luck. But it must be very difficult as a father also to feel that for your children. And some of those death threats came through your children. Your children were used, weren't they? I have said to people that I don't usually think there are things that are unforgivable. But I'm very close to saying the attempts by the apartheid system and those who supported it to get at me by getting at my family are near things that I find unforgivable. Because I say, I chose, to the extent that one has chosen, I chose this particular life and chose it with my eyes open. I couldn't sort of drag my wife and children and say that willy-nilly they are. Fortunately, yes. I mean, I once asked Leah, would you like me to shut up? And it's been an incredibly affirming thing that she said, I'd much rather you were happy on Robben Island, the prison, than unhappy outside. I don't think I could ever be able to thank her for that. But I mean, your child picks up a telephone and it's a call meant for you. And you'd have thought that if someone wanted to give you a death threat and they heard that it wasn't you answering the telephone, they'd say, where is your father? I had wanted to talk to him. And no, they'd say, we're going to kill your father. And I mean, you'd see your child almost seize up. Mm. And that has made me very, very angry.
Record number 6.
The Requiem Mass, whenever I drove from my office in town going to Soweto, I would have a deck playing. And often these solemn pieces of music were just the right mood for the kind of situation we were in.
Beautiful. The Sanctus from Mozart's Requiem Mass with the Academy and Chorus of St Martin in the Fields, conducted by Neville Mariner. You never, of course, Archbishop Tutu, advocated violence, but you are no pacifist either, are you? You do believe that killing can be justified.
Oh, yes. That is the position of the Church. I mean, otherwise, you would never have been able to go to war against Hitler.
Do you think there is a lot in common between Nazism and apartheid?
Well, I myself thought so. I said, I mean, here was a deliberate policy of a government, not only just to denigrate a people, they were seeking to destroy us. They may not have killed us off as in gas chambers. But, I mean, when a child starves and they are stunted as a result of malnutrition, what are you doing? I mean, maybe Hitler's was more efficient, but these guys were determined to be setting out to do the same thing, and we said so to them.
And at the end of the day, if violence was the only catalyst for change, then violence you would advocate.
We said our last non-violent option was sanctions. And we came here, begged your government here, please help us apply economic sanctions to force the South African government to the negotiating table. They were not particularly impressed. But, the people were marvelous. I doff my cap to them and say, you are tremendous. I mean, you should have seen 1988 when we were celebrating Nelson Mandela's 70th birthday. You remember 250,000 of youngsters who had never seen Nelson Mandela. Many of them had not even been born when he went to jail. They all converged on Hyde Park to celebrate the birthday of this prisoner. Incredible. Exhilarating.
There is, on a personal level, there is a lot of the showman in you, isn't there? I mean, you enjoy all of that, being up front, being popular.
I love being loved. And one of the most traumatic things for me was to be the ogre, the man most white South Africans love to hate. It was a traumatic thing.
Let's have some more music.
Bolero. I just love this. It sounds almost African in its repetitiveness.
Part of Ravel's Bolero, played by the Ulster Orchestra, conducted by Jan Pascal Tortelier. We prepare then, Archbishop, to cast you adrift for this desert island.
Yes.
How resourceful are you in the practical sense? I mean, can you fish? Can you swim? Can you build a shelter? Can you?
Oh, I'm totally useless. Leah is the one who is, she's quite brilliant. I mean, if our car stopped and we were stuck, she's the one who will look under the bonnet. I just sit there and I'm totally cast adrift. I really am.
But I'm sure you'll sit there on your desert island and contemplate the tumultuous lifetime that you've had, and,
Yes.
and certainly the 6 months of true democracy
Yes.
that you've just experienced, the ongoing experiment in human relations that's going on in South Africa. And would you sit there and believe completely in its ultimate success?
Absolutely. The world wants us to succeed. There are not too many success stories around. God wants us to succeed as well, so that God can hold us up, precisely because we don't deserve to be held up, and say, Rwanda, you're not too many ethnic groups. Look at South Africa, man. Look at all the languages that they've got there. Look at the differences in culture, etc., etc., etc. They are welding into one. You will too. Bosnia, look at the different faiths in South Africa. And extraordinarily, improbably, they're working together. Don't you think it can happen here in Bosnia?
So you are, in that sense, a beacon of light to the world. You are proof that good can come of evil.
God has used us. God is using us. And all of you have been just marvelous, making it happen.
Let's have your last record.
Mpilo Tutu is a choir that's been playing, singing at many of the things that were important in my life when I was made Bishop of Johannesburg, enthroned as Archbishop of Cape Town. They were prominent when the president was inaugurated. And this is a piece in Xhosa, my home language. Bawo ndixolele. Father, forgive me.
Mpho Ndikolele, sung by the Imlonji Kantu Choral Society.
Beautiful.
Your last record. Well, did I pronounce it right?
Yeah, wonderful.
Now, if you could only take one of those 8 records, which one would it be?
We Are the World.
And what about your book? We give you the Bible and we give you the complete works of Shakespeare. What other book would you like?
Parting the Waters by Branch Taylor, which is a description of the American civil rights struggle. Incredible.
And then, of course, you have one luxurious item on this island. What would you like?
May I take an ice cream making machine and one that produces my favorite rum raisin.
A rum raisin ice cream making machine is yours. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, thank you very much indeed
God bless
for letting
you.
us hear your desert island is. Thank you.